Welcome to Policy Talks. I'm Edmond Young. While several countries have procured satellites from foreign companies or universities, South Africa chose to follow the path of designing and building satellites locally. The first product of this effort was SUNSat, which was launched in 1999. From this initial effort, other satellites have been developed locally and launched, including SumbandilaSat, TsepisoSat, and the MDA satellite communication constellation. Several private companies have also spun off with capabilities to build satellite systems and subsystems. Their customers come from the USA, Asia, Middle East, and Europe. Our guest today is Professor Sias Mostert. He is the founder and chairman of SES Aerospace Group. He joins us to share lessons from the South African experience of building a space ecosystem through engaging the academia and industry. When you were registering for this program, you must have seen his bio. He was at one time in the academia, specifically at Stellenbosch University, before he now went to industry to establish several companies. He will also share on the lessons learned from the formation of the African Resource Management Satellite Constellation, the ARMC, which some of us may be familiar with, but if not, you'll get to know more about it in the course of this program. Professor Mostert, welcome to Policy Talks.
Thank you very much, Ethan. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And so, yes, we have until well, wherever you are in the world, we have an hour, including questions. Is that correct, Ethan?
Yeah, very well. Yeah, we'll try to make it within 1 hour. That's right.
Okay.
So let me start with.
Yes.
Let me start with today. Today is the International Day of Human Space Flight, a day to commemorate the first man in space. That's Yuri Gagarin. At the time this happened, a few African countries had gotten independence, while several others were still under colonial rule. So space was something far-fetched to several African countries. Now, it's been 60 years down the line, and my first question will be, how is Africa faring with respect to space?
Sorry, I missed the word there. How is Africa?
Yeah, I'm talking about,
faring.
How is Africa faring? Yeah, I mean, with respect to space. 60 years since the first human in space.
Well, Africa is extremely active in the domain of space. I made up a list of countries with space programs or space agencies or space secretariats, and I can count 20 countries which are in one way or the other busy with activities in the space domain. So Africa is either catching up or either has the opportunity to leapfrog in a way that is very, very special and particular to Africa. So space certainly has a lot of interest from countries in Africa.
Okay, let's narrow down to South Africa in particular. We can start from as far back as, the 19th century or thereabout. But if we pick from 1994, when you may say that true democracy was installed in South Africa, or where there was where majority rules actually started, you were there at the beginning of things when things started developing in South Africa, and which also led to the efforts that culminated in SUNSat and SumbandilaSat. So let's try and have a brief history of how things happened. If you want to give us an idea of how the whole space project started, starting with SUNSat.
Yes, may I share a screen with you?
Okay. Okay, sorry.
It just be enabled, please.
You should be able to share now.
Yes, I can. Thank you. So I'm just going to share the one slide with you, because this is a picture of the heritage of space technology in South Africa. So it all started out somewhere in the middle 80s, and this is unclear as it was very much a highly classified program at the time. But the GreenSat project was in fact stopped in 1994 and mothballed for potential future application. But we're now quite far into the future, and then nothing has happened. So maybe GreenSat stopped there. But the GreenSat program established a complete set of assembly, integration, and testing facilities. And that was one of the two key outcomes of the program. One was the facilities which were reused in this Department of Communication at the time, 1998. The ESA program ran inside those facilities. And then at University of Stellenbosch, we started a human capital development program around 1991. And in 1994 formed the Electronic Systems Laboratory, which you can still follow today on LinkedIn. And this program then led to the construction of SUNSat. There's a small picture of SUNSat, 64 kilogram. Now in the 1990s, if you wanted any subsystem of a satellite, you had to develop it yourself, essentially. The only exceptions were solar panels and batteries. That's, of course, if you wanted something affordable. We worked very closely with the CSIR during that phase and made use of all the facilities at HOTEC. So those facilities was a catalyst in the development of these programs. Then there was, in 1999, SUNSat was launched, and there was a number of activities post the launch of SUNSat to try and commercialize the technology that has been developed. So the one thing which happened was, I don't see here's SunSpace on the picture. So SunSpace was formed in 2000, at the end of 2000. And SunSpace went on to develop another technology demonstrator, SumbandilaSat, which is this structure here. So that was 64 kilogram, 12 meter resolution. This was 81 kilogram, 6 meter resolution. SunSpace was subsequently absorbed into SpaceTech, which is a South African state-owned enterprise, which state-owned enterprises are quite in the news in South Africa at the moment. And the facility that was established in GreenSat, plus the intellectual property which was developed for the satellite following on SumbandilaSat, called EOSat-1, is mothballed for availability of the active space engineering activities in South Africa. What also happened was that CPUT, Cape Town Peninsula University of Technology, they kicked off a postgraduate qualification, University of Technology. So they went on to build TsepisoSat and then MDA-SAT, as was mentioned in the introduction, 3 2U nanosatellites. Where I'm currently located is here at SES Applications and Engineering. We started applications in 2008, engineering in 2009. And this is where we currently spend our time as a catalyst in the space industry within Africa, and in fact beyond Africa. So what we do here is to assist teams, countries, organizations, space agencies, companies to establish their space programs with the goal of establishing space infrastructure, so that we can not only benefit from building the satellites, but we also benefit from actually using the satellites. Since this transition here, somewhere around here, the space technology became accessible, some of the products that we have built in South Africa and exported. This is a 2-meter GSD imager. That's part of some alignment equipment. And then we developed InSight 1, which is a 2.5 kilogram satellite, which is weighs only 2.5 kilograms. So, and in 2.5 kilograms, we achieve a 30-meter resolution from 400 kilometers. So if you launch this at 500 kilometers as a reference value, and you make a satellite slightly larger to a 3U satellite, maybe 3U, maybe 6U, then in 9 kilograms, say, you can achieve what we achieved here with 81 kilograms. So there's a 10 times improvement in performance versus mass in the satellite technology over the last 10, 15 years. Now, one can combine this with the CSIR. We've been doing work on the MicroStar satellite mission, and this is a MicroStar that has a synthetic aperture radar capability with local monitoring activities. So this gives you an idea of the space hardware. Today we have a number of companies that have specialized in a specific component. There are 2 companies which build cameras for nanosatellites and larger satellites. There's a company that builds propulsion systems for nanosatellites. There's a company that builds ADCS subsystems for nanosatellites. There's a company that builds components for ADCS for microsatellites. So the space industry has the commercial or successful part of the space industry has focused on one component or one set of components that can be sold in the international market. The outstanding area to make a successful industry structure is in satellite integration, assembly integration and testing. That seems a niche area where one of the companies, Dragonfly Aerospace, has got an international investor with an interest in agricultural information company, which are ordering satellites from Dragonfly. So there are different ways of performing, of being successful on the assembly integration and testing, but on the component level, success has been demonstrated a number of times in the South African industry. That's all on the upstream side.
Oh, so thank you, Sias. That was really great. I want us to look a bit more into some of the things that you've just mentioned. One, let's start with the issue of capacity building, especially since the SUNSat project started from Stellenbosch. If you do in terms of assessment, how will you evaluate the capacity building effort since then? And maybe you want to compare that with what's going on now.
Yes, so let me share you with another slide. So this slide gives a summary of the, let me just make it larger. Okay, I'm just going to make this into display format before I share it. I see it needs to be different. So what we have seen since 1992, when we started the capacity building with SUNSat, is quite a remarkable expansion of human capital development. So in 1992, we had one university postgraduate program. We had one university research program. We had one technology demonstrator. We only had one university plus the Science Council involved as organizations. And the GreenSat program provided us with the capability to use the facilities. The program could actually, SUNSat program could actually do AIT plus supply subsystems. if we advance to 2023, we have 3 university postgraduate programs. There are 6 universities with research programs in space. There's another experimental platform, InSight 1, that was launched in 2017. Today we have industry plus university plus the Science Council and in fact plus SANSA. SANSA is now also has been established in 2010. And today we have no fewer than 14 contributing partners to the Space Hub in South Africa. So you can see the growth in the activity at human capital development. Now, there is a next step that has been discussed, but it has not been implemented, and that is the actual implementation of, if you make a comprehensive training capability available in the space domain using the strength of all universities in South Africa, you actually have space engineering, space science, and space applications. So on the space engineering, you have CPUT and Stellenbosch University. On astronomy, there's UCT, Northwest University, University of KwaZulu-Natal. In fact, you can add University of KwaZulu-Natal here for launch vehicles. I attended a launch of a sounding rocket 3 weeks ago that was developed by University of KwaZulu-Natal. We can add launch vehicles here. And then space applications, Earth observation, University of Fort Hare, University of Pretoria, satellite communication, UKZN, and then navigation and positioning unit at the Technical University of Durban. So you can see that there's a whole host of academic qualifications at master and PhD level available from the environment, from the ecosystem within the South African context.
Okay, so if these 2 slides are really impressive. My next question will be, what is the role or contribution of government and industry towards capacity building? Because, yeah. Hello, Sias? Hello, Sias? Oh, okay. Are you there, Sias?
Yes, I'm here. Somehow I just disappeared.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I was asking, you've shown the, capacity building efforts and how South Africa has grown in terms of human capacity in satellite development. And I'm asking, what has been the role or the contribution of government and industry towards fostering these capacity building efforts in South Africa?
That's a very interesting question. So it varies over time. The university, industry and government. So industry has, in the 1990s, when South Africa went through its transition to a full democracy, it was in fact the industry that was the mainstay of the SUNSat program. In fact, industry plus industry university development project from the Department of Trade and Industry at the time, so-called the STRIP program. So industry was instrumental and the university was instrumental, because what is required from a university is that there are a number of academics who actually work together. I recall that we had a visiting German professor there once after, I think after 5 years after we started, and he counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 professors. Impossible, he said. it's impossible for 5 professors to work together. So the university needs to create an environment where academics can actually collaborate, because academics in universities are rewarded by competing against each other, not by working together. So that was the 90s. In the first 10 years of since 2000, it was in fact the driving force in the development of human capital and technology in South Africa was a combination of another government fund who funds R&D, the Innovation Fund. So they were sponsoring the development of optical payload with a 200 millimeter, in fact 280 millimeter diameter mirror, which essentially determines the ground sampling distance that you can achieve with a camera. So they were funding that from a technology development and human capital development perspective. By then we had SunSpace, the industry going, and SunSpace had could interact with the university and sponsor a number of bursaries. And in the case of the government, they came in through the Innovation Fund itself, through one of the agencies of the government. So it was a government, industry, university collaboration that made it possible. Then by 2010, there was a number of small companies that were busy forming. And the government kicked off a program in 2012 for the purpose of EOSat-1. Now, EOSat-1 as itself did not contain any human capital development elements. But the previous satellite that we developed in the 2000 SumbandilaSat had a very specific government contribution through the Department of Science and Technology. Today they call the Department of Science and Innovation. They sponsored 10 engineers for hands-on training as part of the SumbandilaSat program. And these engineers are today, they are all over the place in terms of their contribution in the space domain. And otherwise in South Africa. One of them now is the CEO of the SKA project. One of them is one of 2 people that have been mentioned by the president in his State of the Nation address at the beginning of this year. He mentioned only 2 people, as Judge Raymond Zondo, and then Jesse and Daba, who I see also performs on this program. So those 10 engineers are really all over the place in terms of their contribution in the broader supply chain. Today, if we look at human capital development, it's remarkably enough, it's still the THRIP program that plays a big role in sponsoring master students and PhD student bursaries. And SUNSat, the space agency, has also come on board to sponsor a key number of bursaries across different areas of research in South Africa. So it's always been a joint effort between industry and the government and the university.
Like you mentioned a couple of people that were involved in the program, and some are involved in current programs like the SKA, and you mentioned Jesse, who has gone on to even start our own company. I think if I may ask now, the capabilities that South Africa has, particularly the human capability, what is the risk of losing those skills, those talents to countries abroad, outside Africa?
Well, if you don't, it's a very harsh reality. the very harsh reality is if you don't create an industry in your country, you will lose the people to go work somewhere else. So the way to solve it is to create a local industry. Unfortunately, it's a very harsh reality. Now, at the same time, if you, I've recently been in a country where the Minister of Education, Secretary General of Education, was talking about education in space, and his expressed desire was only to train the people that their particular economy needs. Now, there's a big risk in that, because the simple reality is that there's no space industry in their economy yet, so they're not going to train any human capital in anticipation of a space industry. So in South Africa, I believe we've trained over more than 400 people in space engineering and space science now over the last 30 years. And the bulk of them are working in South Africa at various parts of the space ecosystem. And of course, many of them are also working international. And the fact that they are working international means that you have an international network with which you can make progress in space.
Let's talk about SUNSpace, the concept behind SUNSpace, which is, if I understand clearly, it's a university, it was a spin-off from the university SUNSat project. Can you give us an overview of what led to SUNSpace? Unfortunately, I'm not sure SUNSpace is still functioning now. I think you mentioned that it's been subsumed by maybe space tech. What actually happened, and what lessons can we learn from the issues that SUNSpace faced?
Yeah, so SUNSpace was in fact the outcome of the SUNSat program, and the SUNSat program was a 100-man-year project. So there's 10 people that worked for 10 years, or 20 people working for 5 years. So it's a significant engineering outcome. So it's a complex system. And when we demonstrated this capability to various parties in the world, one of those parties said, "But can they order a satellite from us?" And that's how SUNSpace was formed. It was an international market client that was contracted, and in the end, the satellite that was developed and built for them was at far bigger capabilities than SUNSat had. The challenge with the space industry, the challenge with AIT company is that you need an anchor. You need an anchor stakeholder. You either need an investor that sees the future of such a capability, or you need a national government. I mean, the USA is looking very well after Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and SpaceX. No matter how many problems they have, the US government will look after them. And that's what you need in a country if you want a space integration company. You need a national government or an investor who has a very specific interest to take interest and look after you. Because the problem with an integration company is that your market is actually it may be significant, but it's very lumpy. Now there's a contract, then you have for 3 years, you don't have a project, and then you have a project again. And you can't build a company on that. You can't build a business on that. Maybe you can create a company, but you can't create a business on that. So when SUNSpace was absorbed by the state-owned enterprise, the belief was that through space tech, the belief was that the government will now look after the company, will look after the capability in South Africa. And that may or may not be true. I'm sure it depends on very specific country circumstances. Malaysia formed a company like that, satellite integration company, which was recently disbanded. The government formed the company, and the company was disbanded, I think, a year or 2 years ago, after maybe 2 decades of operations, because there's just not a single country a single national space program just cannot generate enough work to build a business case, a sustainable business case around national satellites. It's just impossible. Unless you're big enough, unless you're India, China, Europe countries, American companies, then it can work. So the question is, how does one of the perplexing questions is how does one create a sustainable business case for AIT system integration, in other words, company? And we have some very specific ideas on how to do that going into the future. I'll leave that for the next conversation.
But looking at the couple of space companies in South Africa right now, for many of their customers are actually outside South Africa, outside Africa. So many times they have to kind of export. Don't you think that in itself is kind of a risk for the companies themselves?
No, the company will, the South African high technology industry has been formed through a number of decades of very little resources and very high expectations. So the engineering mindset is extremely competitive in the global market. And if you apply that engineering mindset into intellectual property, plus the engineering know-how into a product that is competitive in the world market, it will work. Remember, the space programs, as a rule, in the rest of the world, there's a few exceptions, and from time to time there are exceptions. But the space programs in the rest of the world are very well funded. So there's enough national program activity for the companies in many countries in the world to have a good life building space infrastructure with extremely little life or death type of competition. While in the case of South African industry, the space agency is growing its capability in space engineering. I believe in the next 2 years, we will see big advances of that investment in developing the space engineering activity of the space agency. But up to now, the space agency was not in a position to play a holistic, how do we build the space industry role in South Africa. So the space industry needs to look after themselves. They need to secure international market, which they did.
Let me just follow up on that. So what do you think, from your view, is the primary role of the space agency? Is it the role of the space agency to build satellites and maybe serve the government, or should it be focused more on stimulating the industry, or what should be the role of the space agency?
I really like your question. I really like your question. I think for me, I was on a panel last year at the New Space Africa conference in Nairobi, and on this panel, this was a policy panel, and on this panel, I had a lady from Nigeria who was working from SAT, and on my left-hand side, I had a lady from West Africa working in the telecommunications industry. And the lady from Nigeria explained how the Nigerian Space Agency is about, space policy is all about developing the industry in Nigeria. That was the goal. That was the goal. And if you think about ESA, the European Space Agency, if you think about their foundation steps, ESA was founded by the European space industry. It was not formed by the European Commission. The European Commission later came along and formed the body and started buying satellites for services for the member countries. ESA was formed by this European space industry because they needed a strong enough voice to be heard by all their governments together to support space programs in Europe that will keep them sustainable. So if you think about the space agency from a space industry development perspective, I think it's extremely constructive. And then it dawned on me that the South African Space Agency actually has been created, and I had the opportunity to read through many of those policy documents right in the beginning days and give comments on them. But fundamentally, the South African Space Agency is designed, the policy says, serve the government of South Africa. Now, and that's what SUNSat does very well. They serve the government of South Africa very well, but there's some mention of industry development and some mention of other things, but that's the heart of the language. And the challenge with that is that the government is not South Africa. The government has oversight of 30% or 33% of the economy of South Africa. The government doesn't have oversight of the commercial economy. And that's where the problem starts in the South African space. That's why the South African industry had to figure out for themselves, how do they compete? How do they create an existence? And then the penny dropped. And I was part of the people that read through the space policy, and I could give comments on that, and I didn't see the problem, because you have to live the problem to say, but this is how it's going wrong. And then the lady from West Africa started speaking and say, well, they're developing space policies for countries, for the country. Now that's different from the government, and that's different from the industry. For the country includes the government, it includes the people of the country, it includes the industry. So when one conceives of a space policy, one must be extremely careful as to how you structure it. So for me, the role of a space agency is in fact to be holistically, well, if you have to, in the case where a country's economy can grow, focus on developing the industry. It'll be a win-win for everybody. If you have investment capital into exploration, then state exploration in your founding statements. But at least cover industry, society, and government in equal weighting in your space policy if you're a space agency, because it's clear in my mind. What we've experienced in good faith. I mean, everybody has been involved in the creation of SUNSat and giving comments on papers and documents. So there's no, I don't would for in the least would suspect anybody was busy with foul play in the process of forming the space policy and the Space Act and SUNSat. But it just turned out that that's the comfort zone. Let's serve government. So anyway, that's my view. It should be, and if you look at ESA, they were founded in the case of building the industry in Europe. So I would say first prize is holistic, but going just after the industry, developing the industry in a country around space technology and the benefits of space and space engineering is already a big plus for a country.
Okay, thanks for that response. So we started off with Stellenbosch with SUNSat. Let's move to CPUT and let's look at their kind of their own model also. So CPUT has a collaboration with France, which led to the establishment of FSAT. Can you give us an overview of that model and the collaboration with France?
Yeah, so I was never a member of CPUT, so I have limited. What I can give you is an outsider's view of that. But I think the principle of establishing a laboratory at a university build nanosatellites is fine. I think it's a sound departure point. I think the connection with France is fantastic from a point of view of quality assurance of qualifications. So there's a nice oversight from a university in France in relation to that. So as a departure point, it's a good program. I think I think there would also be benefit to not only consider a technical university, but to consider maybe a university with a more traditional engineering faculty. Maybe there's a lot of benefit to gain from that. But there's a lot of growth that's required in South Africa, and where the investments are made is not so important as that the investments are made in human capital and capability development. So from where I standing, in practice, I mean, it's impossible to build a SUNSat inside a university. So I'm going to say it slowly again. It's impossible to build a SUNSat, a 100-man-year project inside a university. Because if you just think about PhDs, and a PhD is 3 years long, you need 30 PhDs, 30 PhDs to build one SUNSat. How do you define a program that's big enough, long enough, organized enough, structured enough to mobilize 30 PhDs to work together on one, let's say over 2 cycles of PhD. So that's 6 years, 15 PhDs over the full period. So it is what's being attempted at CPUT with a nanosatellite. I think nanosatellite technology has made it much easier to build satellites, for sure. The standardization has made that one can create you can do a lot of advanced engineering without doing the engineering. Like you can avoid being a structural engineer, for example, with a CubeSat standard. So there's a lot of decisions that has already been made, and it makes nanosatellites a good vehicle for academic research.
Maybe that leads
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So maybe that leads to the next question. So you left your faculty position at the university, and you went into the industry and started establishing companies, not just one, not two. What was your motivation for leaving the university to the industry?
Well, what I saw at the university was that there are many people, many of my colleagues, who were doing all kinds of projects, research projects and technology development projects. And once the light comes on, once the difficult question has been answered, then they move on to look for the next difficult problem to solve. And at the same time, all this human capital was available at the university, but the foundation of the research centers were not strong. They were completely underfunded. So I asked myself this research question: how does one commercialize technology? Let's say this was in the order of 1995. So then we did a lot of projects inside the electronic systems laboratory at Stellenbosch University. We supplied star camera to Australia. We provided deployable boom to Australia. We provided the camera to South Korea. We supplied some ground equipment to the Agricultural Research Council in South Africa. So we supplied many things from the laboratory. And then when we demonstrated a complete satellite integrated and operating in space, and the first images that were collected, then the interest from the customers went to a next level. They said, well, can we have a whole satellite, please? And at the time, I think my academic colleagues were extremely skeptical of business, because they were all 10, 15 years older than mine was. So they've had many opportunities to try business or not. And for me, it was important to demonstrate two things. One is to say, well, let's make a success of this business. You can't do this with half-time commitment on the one hand, and on the other hand, the only way in my assessment to answer this question, what does it take to commercialize technology, is actually to commercialize technology, actually go through the steps. So that is why we created SUNSpace, in 2000, and why I mostly left the university, not completely. And then when I left SUNSpace, I knew I've learned how difficult it is to build a satellite technology company. From a commercial point of view, from a technical point of view, there are many challenges, but it's not impossible. But from a commercial point of view, not all companies are businesses. Maybe that a company becomes an institute. To become a business, you need to do the same thing over and over and over again. And I saw how difficult it was to build a company, a business, out of building satellites. So we started some downstream companies as well to make use of the capability of satellites. And in the process, we've learned a lot.
And you are a pioneer in the South African space industry. And over the years, several companies have come up now that are kind of doing very well despite the challenges. Would you like to share some of the policy drivers that has given rise to the increase in South African companies and their ability to service even international markets?
Well, if you use the word policy drivers, then you are implying that it was intentional from a government perspective, and I think it's rather more an unintended consequence than a policy driver. So not all unintended consequences are bad, and the reality is that these are extremely difficult ecosystems to construct and to maintain. And it's not only true for things like satellites, it's true for anything that ecosystem of a few hundred people that you need to mobilize to work together to create a significant system, whether it's big mining equipment or whether it's a big defense equipment contract, or whether it's a big energy system or a big production plant. It requires an enormous amount of, if you wanted to do it from a country perspective, an enormous amount of political will. Now, there are some examples. One is the SKA, the Square Kilometer Array, is a successful project with policy drivers from government. And if one looks at those policy drivers, it includes things like international collaboration, which is absolutely critical if you want to be sure that you have a multi-year project. Because if you have international collaboration, then you have lots of international partners who can keep your own government honest when they may lose the way for whatever reason, an election or disruption of whatever kind. But the other important policy driver that makes the Square Kilometer Array successful is that it was built around human capital development. It had the most comprehensive human capital development pipeline I've ever seen. In this case, it was not so much about master students, it was more about PhD students. And it's interesting that these PhD students, their top employer, from what I can deduce from informal consultations, is that the top employer is the financial sector. So they wanted all these people that can do computations, complicated computations. At one stage, we tried to recruit a graduate from the SKA, and we got 0 applications. And I said, but how is this possible? I know they are training, many people are graduating from the SKA. But it was because other industries which were picking them up on completion of the graduation. So those what for me is critical policy drivers. And then the other critical policy driver is, of course, you must know why it is really important for the country. How do you define success? And how do you define success as found expression in the space domain? Not that we have achieved success in any way, but the African Space Policy is a document that has got a very nice table which describes all the needs of society and then distinguishes that in terms of sensors and capabilities that can address those needs. So, and it's not too complicated to do an analysis of where the priority lies today and then start a program to address the priority, taking into account things like international collaboration and HCD. So I think there's a lot of groundwork done to get things done. But sometimes, in the case of the South African space industry, the unintended consequences are not so bad.
So after all these human development efforts or the capacity building, what is the best feasible retention mechanism that a country can adapt or adopt so that the space professionals are engaged? I mean, they stay back in the country and they are properly engaged.
That is extremely simple. And this is once the CEO of SUNSat, not the current one, but one of the previous SUNSat CEOs, were asked in a public meeting with the space industry of South Africa, how can SUNSat be relevant to the space industry in South Africa? And I stood up and I said, it's extremely simple. Give us contracts. So if you, I mean, and it's a universal axiom, if you like. I mean, SpaceX won a contract for $2.9 billion to do a landing to do the final stage of a mission to the moon from NASA, many years before they're actually going to land on the moon, maybe 24, 25. It's a government contract. It keeps SpaceX mobilized and motivated and set with nice high ideals and high goals for the next 3, 4, 5 years. That's the role that government must play. So if you want a retention mechanism, have a program that works. Now, that's not so easy. That is not so easy. If you look at the South African situation, Africa is actually an extremely beautiful test case for it. It's with some people have done a global analysis of space programs. And the interesting thing is that every 10 years, if you're doing it for political reasons, you have a satellite launched every 10 years. So if you look at South Africa, 1999, we had SUNSat launched. In 2009, we had SumbandilaSat launched. And in 2019, we could have had EOSat-1 launched, but both the prime contractor and the sponsor for the program were both learning. They did not take benefit of the existing space industry in South Africa. And now you can ask why, and that's maybe just a rhetorical question. So if you build satellites for political reasons, you need 2 political terms, and then somebody else will stand up and say, but we need a satellite. And people will say, yes, we vote for you because we want a satellite. So the question is, how does one turn that around? That is the heart of the challenge. And this is where I believe the answer lies in a public-private partnership. So the government has a critical role to play. The government, in my view, must be the party who, in the South African case, who buys the first satellite in a new series. They must buy satellite number 1. Now, why that is really important is because if you look at international participation in space missions, whether it's the government or commercial, doesn't matter. The first question they ask you, please tell us about your space heritage. Now, how do you get space heritage if you don't have space heritage? It's only the government that gets the benefit of HCD, which can valorize the benefit of HCD, of national pride, of getting children into science and maths at school level. There's a whole host of benefits. There's a basket of benefits the government only the government can realize by investing in a space program, in a satellite. And that's why governments do it. They want to realize all the benefits. But after the first satellite, or the first set of satellites, or whatever the use case may be, there's a good reason, there's a good understanding, and a good case to make for that satellite will be useful, can be made useful inside a constellation of some kind. And if it's useful inside a constellation, then at least there's data continuity for the users in the country, because that's the problem with building one satellite for a country, is the users say, but we've got data from Sentinel-2, but why would we risk? And we know the data, we know it's for free, we know it's forever. Why would we risk trying to understand a new sensor? We've done this before. We've tried to convince users for using our data. If you ask users what data do you like, they say, can we buy a new workstation, please? And so they're very much happy with what they get. So to get users to move, you need to provide enough data, and you need to provide some data that they cannot get otherwise. Better resolution, temporal, spatial, spectral, something unique, something that makes a difference. And then if you can tell them that, well, you're part of a constellation and we are going to keep on providing the same data for the next 20 years, then they say, aha, maybe I'll try it, but how are you going to do it? Okay, and then of course there's a new foundation of reasons that you need to present to actually do that. And in my view, that is the best way. The government must play a role in retention, but if you're not addressing a need in the society, in your country, and you can't federate your satellite with other satellites in space, it's a very tough thing to do. We've combined all our experience from the ARMC. We haven't even spoken about the ARMC.
Yeah, because of time, I know some other time we'll have to invite you, because I'm conscious of time. I think we'll.
Yeah, I see our time is up.
Yeah, we're going to have another big discussion on the ARMC. So definitely I will invite you for that, because I need to round up now. Just one or two more questions. So for those who are interested in starting space companies, because that's, I mean, we've seen the importance of industry, and we've seen the role that the industry has to play, whether it's upstream, whether it's downstream. What would be your advice for such people?
They must find so my first response is the simple way to start is to grow an activity in a university. University research group is an extremely effective way to plant a seed and to cultivate it and to grow into some kind of system. If you get it right to get 100 man-years into your product, well done. I think if I'm in a position to create a prize called the 100 man-year prize for university teams, I will certainly do so, because that is an incredible achievement. So that's one place to start. The other place, of course, to start is with a client. Yeah? So if you have somebody that is prepared to trust you with a problem, with a need that they cannot solve, and you can connect the dots on how to solve it, then you're away. Then you're on your way. So those are two ways of doing it. But remember, everybody else is trying the same thing. Yeah? So trying to be successful is is quite a story. And of course, the big thing is, what is the outcome that you would like to achieve in terms of, until very recently, before the Amazons and the Facebooks were started laying people off, the algorithm was to develop a product or a service that is somehow in competition with them, so that they want to remove you as their competition and invest in your IP, intellectual property, and capability to deliver. But with the current set of layoffs, that is a more complicated business model to work towards. But to work towards a recurring revenue, providing the same service, or providing the same subsystem or component to an international market or a local market, that's a good place to start to create a sustainable business.
Okay, so just one last question, and then we close for now. We started off with the International Day of Human Spaceflight, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Now, the quest is for human presence on the moon. A lot of discussions are going on, a lot of missions are being planned. Your thoughts, where is Africa in all these efforts, and where should or can we be?
Yeah. So I was introduced to a mission called Africa to the Moon. It was a spin-off out of the Square Kilometer Array project to put a radio astronomy receiver on the far side of the moon with 54 distributed antennas, one each for each of the countries of Africa. And I think that is a kind of project where everybody in Africa can participate. It is going to lead to new science that is, for which there's a strong user base, capability base established in Africa. There are ground stations all the way into Ghana for the Square Kilometer Array. So those are the kinds of projects where which will pull the smart people in Africa together into space around a common objective. So you have the benefits, you're satisfying the principles of international collaboration, and of course we don't have a launch vehicle in Africa, so we need to get some collaboration on launches. It focuses on human capital development. And there's a concrete outcome of radio astronomy. In many of the other cases of going into low Earth orbit and to the moon, I think one has the opportunity in Africa to think completely fresh about it. So space tour until extremely recently was constrained by launch cost. But launch cost has come down to a level of $5,000 a kilogram. And with this new Starship mission that is going to be launched somewhere in the next week, I believe, the cost will come down to $200 a kilogram. Now you don't have to be constrained about how much mass you put into orbit or how much mass you send to the moon. Now you can think about, what is the new set of problems I can solve? And I would think that from Africa's perspective, one should not try to limit your imagination as to what is possible, because it has become extremely affordable. So one doesn't have to stand back for the point of cost. You can now stand back for other reasons. Maybe we don't have all the resources yet. Maybe there are other constraints that are coming on. But from a point of view of focusing on one or two or three key aspects of the logistics supply chain, of focusing on space resource exploitation, mining, the impact of health on people going to low Earth orbit and to the moon and maybe even to Mars, all provides us with lessons learned that we can apply to what we believe are unlimited resources on Earth, but actually they're not unlimited. We don't have yet reached the limits of what is available, and climate change may force those limits on us in a very unpleasant way. So it's worthwhile to stretch your mind about how does one perform basic human life activities in space, because that gives you the perspective that's needed to withstand all the realities of the environment changes that are we going to see on Earth. So I think Africa should get involved. I think Africa should board the sailing ships to the moon and be there. Africa has a role to play.
And thank you for mentioning the Africa to Moon mission. I've already invited Carla Sharp. She's going to be coming soon also to tell us about the Africa to Moon mission and kind of give us an update of maybe there are any new plans to maybe revive the project, or like you've mentioned, new ideas that that may have come up. So, Professor Mostert, I think we'll have to end it at this point. Thank you so much, but I think you will have to come again. Like you mentioned, we couldn't touch on the ARMC, and I also was thinking we'll be able to talk about RASCOM also, but I think maybe we'll keep those two for another time. So I definitely will invite you very soon once again. Thank you so much for your time. It's been very insightful, and thanks everybody for joining us at this time. And I look forward to our participation in the next edition. All right, bye for now.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, and yes, let's take Africa to space.